Welcome everybody to the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm your host Seth Galina alongside PFF. Are you still 7 bracket or are you new coverage this week?
I'm 7 bracket, but I'm thinking of changing it to clip. So, we'll see.
All right, let's before we get into it, let us tell the listeners let's start with 7 bracket. We should have done it last week. Mm-hmm. But we'll do both this week. We do 7 bracket and clip, and next week we can do another one.
Okay.
Explain to the listeners what 7 bracket is.
Okay. I'm going to oversimplify this just for the sake of saving you guys time. So 7 bracket is man with the corner. So you think the furthest receiver out on the corner. I mean, obviously, I don't have to break down how football works to you guys. So the corner on the number 1 receiver, that's man-to-man. So everywhere he goes, it's called Meg technique. That means I have him all over the field. The number 2 receiver, the rule is the nickel, so the Sam, whatever personnel they're using, he has the number 2 man-to-man unless the number 3 receiver runs out fast. So runs some kind of like arrow route, like maybe a bubble, something like that. If that happens, it turns into zone-ish, where the guy's kind of playing flats like you would in cover 4, and then the safety is playing what's called robber technique, which means that he has number 2 if he's vertical. If number 2 is not vertical, then he takes his eyes to number 1. It's an oversimplification. I was actually talking to, because you're in the group chat that we're in, there are people who are interested in it, and I've considered doing a Zoom or some kind of powwow where everybody can ask those types of questions. And I'm not the master of this stuff. I really would recommend that people follow Kyle Kogan, Chris Vassar, all those guys that are on the coaching Twitter that have kind of started to creep over into kind of the media side of things. Those are 2 guys I can say for sure that have good information and are good people and will be receptive to answering your questions. But yeah, that's bracket.
I'm going to even oversimplify it even more. And I'm very sorry. And someone's going to kill me for this. One of these people that you just mentioned is going to kill me with this. Look, it's man-to-man on the outside, like you said. And then it's just a double. It's a double on the slot receiver. So there's one guy who's outside of him, and it's usually the nickel. And there's one guy who's high and inside of him, and that's the safety. And there's your double. There you go.
Basically, bracket. That's bracket.
That's how So who plays 7 bracket a lot? I believe Alabama does a lot because they like to play their guys outside shade. Is it a TCU thing too? It seems like it could be.
So they have their own. They run like blue, what they call blue, which I guess is kind of their variation of it. It's probably a little bit closer to playing like Meg. So for people who don't know the Saban terminology, Meg just means the same rule. You're playing man on the outside and then playing like your regular cover 4 rules where the overhang has the flat and the safety has anything vertical. I would have to talk to Vass about that. He would obviously know the TCU stuff a lot better than I would. But it's close. It's not exactly that. Kogan would call that zone match. So, and I know that they kind of get into it and bump heads about where the dividing line is between zone match and man match. And it's all really what we're talking about is the differences in techniques. But yeah, TCU does have, I guess, their variation of it. But who else runs it? Alabama, you pointed it out. Tennessee, Georgia basically like bases out of it.
Okay, there you
go. They'll mix in some different coverages based on who's playing the nickel or the Sam, so who that overhang is. But when it's actual nickel personnel, that's basically their base call.
Now it's easy if you're like a team like Georgia, like Alabama, who is going to try their best to stay in too high for as long as possible, then spin one of the safeties down to disguise. And get into whether it's cover 1 or cover 3. It seems like having your nickel outside shade of the slot would allow you to keep that disguise as long as possible, because you want that nickel for the most part in most 1 high coverages to be outside of the slot. So now you're getting it in your 2 high coverage and your 1 high coverage, so now you can stay in 2 high a little longer and then spin down and disguise as long as possible.
Right. And actually Clemson's another team. Before they started messing around with the 3 high stuff that they're doing now, they did this. They did a lot of this. Like when they had their Kayvon Wallace, Tanner Muse, Isaiah Simmons, and Nolan Turner combination, and they actually had like a good 4-down pass rush that they were confident in. They played a lot of this too. But to your point, yes, it disguises well. Like I know as a coach, when we talk about playing bracket, when I set a guy outside leverage, really what I tell the rest of the defense is we do it because we're shrinking the field, is what I say. Like we're putting an umbrella kind of around the field where we're dealing with number 2 receivers and in. We're playing man on a number 1 receiver, so we're treating them like they don't exist. Basically, right, for all intents and purposes of the defense. So it shrinks the field for defenders. And it makes it, I mean, every defense does this on one level or another, but you're basically trying to play a process of elimination game by saying, we're going to take X away and you're going to have to do Y to beat us. And we'll have to live with, you doing Y. And then we're relying on having better players than you, having a good pass rush, timing up the play, being better than the quality of the throw. Everybody has different kind of approaches to it. But yeah, on a certain level defensively, you're taking one thing away, forcing them to do another, and then relying on the fact that you have better players than they do when they go to option B, option C.
I think also, again, this might be I might be wrong about this, but against trips, you'll see a lot of teams play, I would call it stubby or stump, which is basically, I'm going to get killed for this one, which is basically,
I can't wait for this.
Which is basically, it's 7 bracket. It's that type of coverage, 2 trips. So
Yes.
again, we're taking away the number 1 receiver. Not everybody runs this to trips. I mean, this is one of your base calls in college football right now, in high school football, in the NFL, in some certain places too, is playing this to trips. I guess. I mean, maybe it's not really stubby. Maybe stubby is more of a palms thing. But
So,
yeah,
what I would say is, well, you play stubby and stump to trips when you're not. And somebody's going to disagree with me on this. I'm positive about it. But this is my perspective on it. You really like stubby and stump, especially when you're not expecting verticals out of 3x1. Like, it's great against all the underneath exchange stuff, like anything where somebody's going to be like running a hitch or a drag to the weak side, things like that, or if you're trying to get like flood where you're creating 3 levels of routes going to the sideline, like it's awesome versus that stuff. And a lot of teams go into trips to do that specifically, is to try to work some type of levels concept or something where you've got some kind of clear out route, one guy in that 10 to 12 yard range, and then one guy as like the bait in the flats or, running a hitch or a drag or something like that. And Stump and Stubby do a great job of getting guys in those windows and being tight to routes against that stuff. It's not as good against the vertical stuff. And that's why, clip was what I brought up. And that's one of those things that can be better against verticals than Stump and Stubby.
okay. So let's get the clip. Clip is. Okay, I'll start with my super oversimplification. It's cover 2 to trips. Like there it is.
Yes. So clip, yes, it's man match cover 2. I want to be sure because I don't want any coaches blowing up my DMs asking me if I actually know what I'm talking about. So it's man match cover 2, where the inside pieces, so your Sam, your star, your Mike backer, whatever you want to call them, they are carrying the slot and the number 3 receiver on anything vertical and anything inside. If the route goes out, so if it's like a stick concept, so that's actually a really good example. If it's a stick concept, the number 1 receiver is running a 9. He's running the clear out route. So the corner is kind of play inside leverage and just sync with that route. And the goal there is to try to eliminate that hole shot in cover 2 that we see where the routes convert into fades. The quarterback just tries to throw it in between the corner and the safety. So he's syncing to take that away. The number 2 receiver is running the speed out. So that defender is going to be man on that guy, but he's really delivering him out to the flat or to the corner to take, and he's going to go take the number 1 receiver. So again, when I coach, when we're talking about like man match stuff, I say like think basketball like you're switching a pick and roll. Like you do it under a very specific circumstance, right? Like if the offense does this specific thing, we have this specific response. So that's basically what it is. And the reason why I say it's good against verticals is because you have the option to poach with the backside safety. You can do it in stubby and stump, but usually you're playing stubby and stump because you're trying to double the X receiver, not necessarily rob the over route. So if you go back, if anybody has Game Pass and they want to go back and watch the Super Bowl, anytime you see Kansas City in a 3-by-1 set and Tampa Bay is in too high coverage, look at the safety to the single receiver side. So because they played a lot of clip and then the trips check within clip, which is called posse, where the backside safety, the weak side safety, is looking at the number 3 receiver on anything vertical and coming back across the formation. And you call that like a poach safety, whatever terminology that you're familiar with. That's all it is. And that's usually better against verticals because you have a guy assigned to each. And it doesn't put as much stress on the safety as it would in stubby, because what you would do against stubby and stump is you run that over route from number 3, and then number 2 has the bender route where he's going to push vertical and outside and then put his foot in the ground and then come right back to the hash. And you're just trying to clear open enough space to where that high safety has to choose between which vertical to take. So yeah, beaters, coverages, all that good stuff.
My last thing about clip is I know that Tennessee I believe ran a bunch of clip in 2019. I haven't really watched them in 2020 under Pruitt, but one of the things I noticed, because they couldn't, you're in a weird spot sometimes because that safety has to really fly out. The field side safety really has to fly out just in case you get like you said, that stick route where you're getting a 9 by the outside receiver. He's got to go pick that thing up. And it can kind of sometimes undress your Mike linebacker. So then you kind of, now you're saying, okay, well, if we're going to play this, then we have to use our backside safety to kind of keep an eye on the Mike linebacker so that we don't get any vertical shots right into the open space. But then that everything pushes, because now you're thinking, okay, well, if that safety is looking to the field side, then what do I got my backside corner doing? We got to be able to hold up there.
Yeah.
So you can get the Mike undressed a little bit, if you're not careful, if you can't deal with the X for sure, in that coverage. But it is a good coverage. All right. Next week, another coverage. I think we should start doing this.
I don't mind it. Basis. I don't hate it. Actually, we should do one defensive thing and one offensive thing.
Okay, so we're gonna do 4 verts we're gonna do each route in 4 verts every week. All right, let's get into the news of the week, which really is just we have FCS starting. I think we're gonna get into that in once we get a beat on what's going on in the FCS. But the big news of the week was Gus Malzahn already back. He signs with Central Florida to become their new head coach. I know you're a big Gus fan. I think you are, right? I could say that.
Yes.
I think you're a big Gus fan. So I think we're probably going to be on the same page. I'll give you the floor in a second. I think my take is that I don't know if it's going to work out this year, honestly. They know they have a good quarterback. We'll talk about that later. I don't know if it's going to work out right away, but I think this guy is a really, really good coach. And I think he could get the levels of recruitment to where they need it to be, because the ACC is a really strong conference. So it might not happen right away. They might not come back with a 10-win season. Everyone's thinking, okay, well, UCF, they're going to bounce back. You didn't have a great year this year. They're going to bounce back. I don't know if that's going to happen. But I think over time, I'm a fan of this hire.
I would agree. And I haven't spent a lot of time on Twitter, but from what I had checked, I know that some UCF fans were maybe a little bit more down on the hire than I would have expected. And I'm not entertaining that. Beyond me just being a fan of Gus Malzahn, I just want to remind everybody that in the year that he was an OC and won a national title, they beat Alabama with a less talented team. The year where he was a head coach and they went to the national title, he went to the national title with not an untalented team, but if you go back and look at the players on that roster, that is not a championship level team. I mean, obviously they caught some lucky breaks with the ball bouncing off a guy's helmet against Georgia and, the kick 6 against Alabama. But still, he led a team to a national title.
They went to a national championship game. Their starting quarterback
Is a
was
cornerback.
a future CFL cornerback.
Yes.
So I think that says a lot to what he's been able to accomplish there at all.
Not just that, he couldn't cut it at Georgia. He played corner at Georgia and had to leave because he couldn't get playing time there. And that's no disrespect to Nick Marshall, because he had an excellent season that year. But if you are just going to focus on the coaching of football thing, he has clearly shown that he's a quality coach. I will say, there's some fair criticism to have of him as a recruiter. I'm not going to make the excuses. There is a reality of the fact that he's battling with the biggest brand in college football, basically across the street from him. And then add into the fact that Clemson is what it is, that Georgia is what it is right now. So, the areas where they will recruit, it's a lot more competitive than it will be at UCF. So I think from that standpoint, he's going to be working at much more of an advantage than he usually would. Because one thing you can definitely say about like maybe the last 3 or so Auburn teams is that the fits player and personnel wise to the offense that he likes hasn't really matched up all that much. They have not had the kind of offensive line talent that you would expect for an SEC team. Obviously, quarterback play is up and down regardless. You're not going to have a Cam Newton every time you go out onto the recruiting trail. But they have not had a quarterback like that. I don't even know if they've had a quarterback perform as well as Nick Marshall has since 2014. So, obviously that was an issue. But one thing he does do very well is recruit defensive guys. And there's going to be a lot of offensive and defensive talent in Central Florida, in the Orlando area. They can recruit into Miami as well when they need to. They can recruit into Tampa when they need to. So he will have the players, like you said. I don't know if it'll happen right now. It might be a season. But I don't think that the things that troubled him at Auburn that eventually wore out his welcome at Auburn, I don't believe that that's going to be the same kind of thing. And I know UCF likes to think of themselves as a national property. Not there yet, guys. And it's okay. It's okay. You'll continue to dominate the American Conference. But yeah, I'm a fan of the hire. I think strictly from a football sense, there's nothing that makes me think that that's not going to work.
But you know what? You talk about them not being a national power or whatever. Well, one of the problems is with Heupel, I've talked about this like every week on a podcast. I fucking love Heupel. But I was reading today on 247 Sports, and I forgot the name of the writer, or else I would have shouted him out. But man, they were not barely recruiting the Orlando area of all places. That's your home turf, and you can't even get kids out of there. And, there was some coaches, some high school coaches in the area saying like, well, we didn't even feel like there was a UCF presence there. I think that will change.
Yes.
And the thing is, if you want to be that school that you think you are, if you're a UCF fan or you're part of UCF, I think they were the last 2 years, number 4 and number 7 recruiting class in conference. Like that, right. That's not going to cut it. As much as Josh Heupel can, perform some magic on the field, I think that eventually that wears up, man. You gotta have talent to compete wherever you are. So I think getting Gus in there, like you said, you can get kids on defense. The offense is, so this is the next thing we're going to talk about, is almost no matter who was going to take this job, unless it was like Jeff Lebby coming back and running the same thing. There's like 5 coaches who would have came back and it probably would have been the same offense. Other than that, there was always going to be this unbelievable extreme difference between what they've been running under Heupel and what's going to happen. And now we have Gus Malzahn, where it probably is one of the most extreme differences that we're going to see in terms of 2 different offenses on the field. So, man, I went back and I watched UCF because I wanted to watch Dylan Gabriel. Their quarterback was coming back, who grades really well for us last year. Mm-hmm. And then the news came out today. So now I went from UCF and I went straight to the Auburn offense from this year. And I know, Chad Morris called the plays, but it's still Gus's offense, it's still his philosophy. And they have ties together from before, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
So I tell you, you gotta go. Like, if this is a good exercise, if you have time to go watch film, is go watch one Central Florida game, watch one Auburn game, watch one Central Florida game, watch one Auburn game. It's not even it's like they're not even playing the same sports sometimes.
Yeah.
So I look at that, and that is kind of one of the reasons why I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna click right away, because we have not seen Dylan Gabriel play in an offense where there's a 5-yard in route, where there's a 10-yard in route, where there's a drag route, where there's an over route, where there's I don't know, I can name you the amount of routes that he's never thrown in his life. Does he perform well in that hyper offense? 100%. But it's so unknown how he's gonna look, and they lose some skilled players, and I think they might lose some offensive linemen too. So I just don't know how that's going to look going into an offense where now you got to make some reads over the middle of the field. They're going to go. I saw them go empty a lot. I didn't think they were very good in it, Auburn, but they went empty a lot, and they're trying to throw this like kind of like a weak side option thing. Like that's difficult, man. More quick game stuff over the middle. That stuff did not exist in the hyper offense. So I'm very curious, and I'm hopeful for the kid's sake that he's able to figure it out early enough, and he can have a good season. But I think that is, for me, the most concerning thing is the extreme offenses from Auburn and UCF, from Malzahn to Heupel, I guess.
What I'm really interested to see is when Malzahn is in the building and starts evaluating what UCF is and what they can attract as far as a talent perspective. If I were him, I would go back and I would watch all of the Scott Frost film that I can find when he was at UCF. And you know what I think he'll find? I think he'll see, that's a lot like what I was doing between 2010 and 2014. Maybe I can go back to doing that type of stuff, because the defensive talent, and the defensive stuff scheme-wise at the G5 level is not like playing man-match quarters defense in the SEC. It's just not. And it's not, I don't want to make a value judgment and say one is better or worse. They're just different. The kinds of things that you have to do in order to beat those types of defenses is not the same thing as, hey, we're trying to get a snap off every 17 seconds. Good luck trying to run your intricate defense with this 5-man pressure where you're playing 3 over 2 to one side and man to man on the other and all that stuff. Like, that's all great, well and good, but we're faster than you, and we have a good quarterback. If I were Gus, I'd be looking at this and saying, I can kind of get back to my roots a little bit. So I'm going to be interested year one to see if he says, you know what, we can't do everything that I like to do, but we can definitely run plays as fast as possible, and that's going to be the goal.
And that's, I mean, if there's anything that they are similar with, it is the speed of which they're going to play. Again, you go watch, I couldn't believe it when I was watching the tape this weekend. I've never seen defenses, and it happens every game, playing against Heupel's offense, guys running off the field late, guys can't get lined on defense, it can't get lined up. And I thought there was a really good example in the first game of the season, playing Georgia Tech, and they upset Georgia Tech, and you saw a lot of, and this is where Gus will have some fun, because Dylan Gabriel does have some juice in his legs. He can move around a bit, but like, so you're going at this like I've never seen tempo like this in my life. It is absolutely insane tempo, because they don't run a lot of things. So you don't have to do a lot of hand signals on the sideline, right? You one hand signal, you're gone, or like one hand signal for each unit group, and then you're gone. And then so like they end up in situations where now the defense doesn't know, when you're playing against an option look, you got to be prepared for which player has the dive. When we say this, this is like cliche stuff, but who has the dive, who has the quarterback, who has the pitch. Right. Georgia Tech is sitting there like, I got 2 guys on a dive, and he keeps it. Yep. 2 guys outside, he gives it. Because they're so like frazzled by the speed of which. And I think that's something that Malzahn can use to his advantage. They're very well versed in it, in terms of how they're coached up to. I think there's a clinic out there, maybe the old quarterback coach from Central Florida, I believe, though it might have been the Frost years, but I think it's the Heupel years, where he just talks about how they catch the football, they get tackled, they go down, they go out of bounds wherever, and they will make a beeline for the closest, or like the referee who puts the ball down.
Yes.
And like just give him the ball as soon as possible, and the refs have no choice but to kind of start the play clock at that time. So I think it's that would be something that I think for sure that Gus can keep, going forward, even with the probable immense changes he's going to make to what they did from a year ago.
Right. I think the explosive plays that they get, the explosive plays that Gus Malzahn is after is in the run game, and that's where it's going to be very different.
Yeah.
Obviously, Heupel is trying to hit you over the top. But when Frost was there, at least, it was a little bit more balanced. So, again, I think he's going to see that the capability is there to do things that are true to him. And to your point, I was watching the Memphis game before I had to go coach. And Memphis is a team that offensively, they like to use a little bit of tempo too. They spray the ball all over the place. So it's not like the Memphis defenders are this is a completely alien concept to them. And you can see there are snaps where UCF's linemen are set and these guys are sitting here with their hands on their hips, still looking at the sideline like, somebody please get me, a Gatorade bottle. So there's nothing that, I don't know if you can find any advantage outside of talent that can break a game quite like tempo does in college football. And like you said, receivers will go out of bounds and they're bolting. I've seen them spot the ball themselves, damn near. They're running right to where the ball is down, putting the ball on the hash, and then they're flying out to where they're supposed to be aligned. So it's impressive. So like we've been kind of harping on, they're still going to be successful, even if it's not perfect, just because he can step in and from a tempo perspective, be able to say, hey, we're going to continue doing what's been happening here for the last 6-7 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the point you make about the Scott Frost offense is actually, it's something I didn't even think about. I think it's a great point because that is so much similar to what Gus wants to do than what Heupel wants to do. It's modern spread option offense. And I think that Gus is a little more tight in his formations and maybe a little heavier in his personnel. But regardless, I think that's an apt comparison to make because I think that is where he needs to look for and mold that offense and see that, hey, I can do this. I got to be maybe I got to have a better quarterback than I had last year at Auburn, maybe a better offensive line than I had last year at Auburn, like you said. That was the thing that stood out for me on tape. Like, look, I not like Bo Nix just hasn't turned into the quarterback that I think a lot of people want him to be. However, he didn't have a lot of help there. That was not a great offensive line there. So I got to give him kind of the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully, on their end, Harsin and Mike Bobo can fix that. So yeah, do you see this being, when we look at UCF going forward, where do you see Malzahn's offense changing? It started one way, it's evolved through the years. Where do you see it going in 2021 in the future?
I would say my expectation is that it does just kind of go back to what it was between 2013 and 2016. It was we're running power with tempo as often as we can, and then we're going to get into all of the crazy misdirection, hiding the ball or, the jet and orbit motions, and we're just trying to throw that big post, that big home run post after you've committed all these bodies to stopping the run. That's kind of what I would expect. Like I said, a lot of the Auburn stuff, I think he had to get away from some of the stuff that he would probably prefer to run because he didn't have the running back that he usually does. There really wasn't a Trey Mason or Kerryon Johnson on roster, or even a Michael Dyer for that sake. Obviously not the quarterback talent he had and not the offensive line talent that he has when he's had it at his best. And that offense does rely on having physical guys up front, as well as, that physical kind of H-back guy that you can run all of that two-back stuff off of. So there is some kind of middle read stuff to his offense. He can go into the vertical passing game, but he's not necessarily basing out of it the way that Heupel wants to go fast and throw deep. all the time, right?
Yeah.
That's what he's looking for. I think Gus is probably a little bit more methodical. I think he's a little bit more, at peace with, hey, if I got to hand the ball off 42 times to win a game, then that's what we'll do. So that would be my guess. So I'm hoping that they're successful early, because I do think if they're not, if they're continually tripping up against some of the other best teams in the American and they're changing the system, I can see how it can maybe go left, because I don't think it's going to be as sexy as what Heupel does right off the bat. So, we'd have to see, whether or not their quarterback can actually perform up to the level that they need to in the passing game. Because if he can, then they'll be okay.
Oh, for sure. Would you say that Gus's offense is what people would call series based?
Yes, I've called it the spread wing tee before.
Yeah, okay.
It's very much like we're doing this one thing, not necessarily because that's all we care about, but because we're thinking like that's going to get us to point B, point C, point D down the road.
All right. Enough about Gus. I know you could probably talk for another 3 hours about your boy, but
Absolutely.
Let's get into on the website, pff.com, we put out the ranking of our top 10 returning college quarterbacks. So we're going to go through the list, talk about each one, how we feel about each one, whether we feel like they're too high, they're too low, et cetera, et cetera. So number one, for me, this is an easy number one, is Oklahoma's quarterback, Spencer Rattler. You agree? You think he's also... I might be too hyped on him right now, because he a little guy. He's got some juice, got a nice aesthetic. He likes throwing the ball over the middle. He's not afraid. So I'm kind of crushing on Spencer Rattler a little bit. What are your thoughts on him?
To me, of the list that we're looking at, and we'll obviously get into it the more we go down, but when you watch his film, he is the easiest to project, like, next level wise, because of the kinds of throws that he's willing to make. Not a lot of offenses don't ask guys to make tight window throws, and Oklahoma's offense doesn't necessarily ask him to make tight window throws, but he's willing and able. And to your point, obviously the way he plays, it's very exciting to watch.
Yeah.
He's got a great release. There's a lot more velocity on his passes than I think I saw like on broadcast copy. Like watching from all 22, it's a lot clearer that he actually has like real arm talent. It's not just a touch thing. It's not just a timing thing. Like he can actually fit the ball in. So from that perspective, I mean, he does that, and the other quarterbacks on this list don't necessarily do that. And it's because he has the arm strength to do it. Obviously, he can move around a little bit. He's not an elite athlete, but he's functional enough as an athlete to be able to extend. And I think he's kind of like a perfect guy for the offense they run.
Yeah,
all those pop passes and deep play action shots and all that stuff that they like to set up. Like he has the arm to throw guys open when it's not there. And if it is there, he's going to find the guys more times than not.
I'm really excited to see him next year. It'll be his second year starting, which obviously is a big deal. Third year in the system. And one of the things I noticed, the first thing is the willingness to throw the ball over the middle of the field. Like you said, I think that is what separates him from a lot of people in this class. But one of the things I noticed was it felt like a lot of OU staple stuff. And maybe I'm just thinking about the fact that you didn't see a lot of mesh, and they have that route, that the kind of like drag route that gets under one linebacker and then goes over another linebacker and gets lost forever, and they get huge plays. Teams did a really good job defending that specifically. Maybe by accident, like who knows? Could be just happened to make the right call at the right time. But it felt like stuff like that, a lot less mesh, which they practiced so much over the years, couldn't get this play to work. The one where they're talking about the under and the over. So I'm like excited to see Lincoln Riley back in the lab for 2021, coming up with some new stuff to help Spencer Rattler. Maybe they'll go back to mesh. Maybe they'll do some other stuff. Maybe they'll get into like some sail stuff. I don't know. I don't think they're a big sail team. That means a deep out. I think with his arm talent, I think he can get the ball in there for sure. So I think I'm really excited to see how this offense looks. They're getting Marvin Mims back. He's a nasty receiver. So like that, I think he's clear number one right now, just because you said the arm talent is absurd. and I
Yeah.
think he'll get better understanding timing, and he's still good at this stuff. It's not like he's bad at this. He's very good.
Right.
Timing, accuracy is fantastic. Throwing the ball in tight windows, it's just look. Okay, I'm done. I'm done gushing over him. He's for me number one. Maybe not by far, but a true number
I think
one.
he's comfortable. I would say he's kind of comfortably number one. I mean, the margin is not ridiculous, but he is definitely the rightful and comfortable number one. And I will say, like, it's dumb to say about Oklahoma because they are still super talented. But if you compare what he was throwing to last season versus what some of the other quarterbacks who have been at Oklahoma have had to throw to, they were down by Oklahoma offensive standards,
Yeah.
you know? So getting some of those guys back, getting some extra time in with that. Obviously, last season was what it was, you know, for as nuts as it was. So, you know, you give a quarterback like that a little bit of extra time, you return some talent for him. I think that we'll get a really good look at what he's going to be as a pro next season.
Okay, number 2, Sam Howell, North Carolina. Howell was a guy who, you know, I always looked at him and compared him to a guy in the same class, Keaton Slovis. They both came in as true freshmen in 2019. Both, you know, had great seasons. And I looked at Howell and I was like, because I'm an idiot. I was like, oh, well, you know, it's all RPO. It's all like vertical stuff. It's not quite like what Heupel is doing, but there's a lot of similarities there. And I was like, oh, well, you know, Keaton Slovis, you know, he plays in like the true air raid, and he's making all these reads over the field, and blah blah blah. And we'll get to Keaton Slovis later, but Sam Howell was just awesome this year. I stand corrected. I not that I thought he was a bad quarterback. I knew he was a good quarterback, but like, oh my God, he was awesome this year. Unbelievable deep ball thrower. Again, you have a lot of opportunities to throw the ball deep in that offense because they're going to take a lot of chances with Phil Longo as a quarterback, but as the offensive coordinator. But I'm just a fan of him. Soft touch. I thought he became better as a true drop back passer this season. You know, when we take away play action, rollout screens, that type of thing. So I'm on board. I you know, think he's in that conversation. I think he's in the conversation for QB1. I know we talked about Spencer Rattler being pretty far and away, but if there's a big season from Howell and a step back from Rattler, I could see Howell going at QB1 2022 draft.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think that he's number 2. The question for him is going to be, we'll get a very clear idea of who he is as a quarterback this season because he's not going to be driving the Ferrari anymore.
Yeah.
You know, obviously losing his 2 backs, losing a receiver, all these guys who are going to probably be productive pros. That's going to be a hit to the offense. But he was extremely productive with what they do. A great timing and touch passer. You know, you can look at some of those play action shots, some of those deeper throws, and he's always on time with it. He's not throwing the ball, you know, just all over the place. So defensive players don't have a lot of opportunities to get their hands on it. You know, he can definitely improve under pressure, but that offense isn't necessarily designed to have outlets when there's pressure. Everything is kind of drawn up for perfect scenario. We have everything blocked up, and we got the one-on-one outside that we want. So from that perspective, you know, when they get what they want offensively, he's very productive in it. And based off what he's shown the last 2 seasons, he should be number 2. And if he makes another step up, then yeah, he should be in the conversation for QB1. If they have a good year, maybe he gets, you know, some Heisman love as well.
Yeah, it's a big year because losing like all those skill position players is it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Okay, well, let's stay in the same offense basically that we've been talking about for the past month on this podcast. Number 3, Derek King, Miami. I'm so happy for this guy because, you know, he has this breakout year in Houston, and then Dana Holgorsen comes in. They change the offense a bit. I mean, what a disaster of a year that was for the entire program at Houston. He transfers to Miami. We don't know what type of offense he's going to run. The offensive coordinator job is open. I'm not sure the timeline, but like they needed an OC that last offseason. They go and get Rhett Lashley, who puts in the super spreader, vertical shot offense, and it just works. So, and that's the offense that he ran when he had that big year in Houston, and he was awesome this year. I didn't realize how much of a crazy athlete he was. He makes people miss. He's thick. And one of the things I like the best is he throws these moonball 9 routes. Like those balls leave the screen. They go and they get sucked into the another planet's orbit, and then they come down like Russell Wilson. So big time fan of Derek King. Hopefully he can improve. He needs to improve, right? I think like just a drop back passing game needs to improve, but big fan of his game.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the one thing I think that I maybe underrated the most, or just because we didn't get a lot of time to look at him in Houston, is how well he understands what his skill set is. So he's not going to take risks with his arm when he knows that he can make up for it with his legs. Like, that's one thing that I appreciate in his game. You mentioned it, his vertical throws, like, he's smart enough to know that he's not going to beat guys on velocity. So he's just going to throw a touch and lay it out there and give it a bunch of air, and give his receiver a chance to go make the play in the air. So from that perspective, like as far as understanding skill sets, that's perfect for the kind of offense that he's running. And, if this is what it's going to be, if Rhett Lashley can continue to, add a little bit to his game, maybe ask him to do a little bit more as a drop back passer so there's not as much stress on him to have to throw the ball vertically, I think that he can have a breakout year again.
All right, let's move on to, again, we stay with the same offense because this is what's college football is right now. Yep. Number 4, Dillon Gabriel. We've talked about him a bit already. Central Florida. So he grades well in our system, the PFF grading system. It's one of the issues is when you play in this type of offense, and King is the same and Howell is the same, you don't have a lot of opportunity for negative plays. And you kind of touched on that a little bit before. If you don't have a lot of opportunities for negative plays because you're not asked to throw basically over the middle of the field, you're going to grade pretty well. As long as you hit a few deep balls a game, you're going to end up grading pretty well. And that's kind of what Gabriel was, especially because the Heupel offense compared to Lashley's offense at North Carolina, compared to Phil Longo's offense Lashley at Miami, Phil Longo at North Carolina, this is the super spreadiest of them all.
Yes.
So I look at it and I'm like, is he a pro prospect? I don't know. He has a strong arm. I like watching lefties. I'm a lefty. I like watching lefties. He's got some juice in his legs, like I said. You can run some zone reads for him, no problem. But we just don't know anything about him as a quarterback yet. So again, we're going back to the same stuff that I said earlier, but just excited to see him. Hopefully he can figure it out in a completely different offense in 2021.
Yeah, I'm sorry to Dillon Gabriel, but I have been burned way too many times by these vertical read quarterbacks. Yep. I've got to see it. I'm sorry. I have to see it in something different. That's not to say that he did not have maybe like the 4th best year of the 10 guys that we're looking at, because there's definitely an argument for that. But if we're making like a value judgment on his quality as a passer, I mean, first of all, like the splits are they're so extreme. The offense is so extreme. I can't even put it into words. Like I was watching film before earlier today where the ball is on the right hash and the number 1 receiver out to the wide side of the field is on the sideline. That's not real offense. I'm sorry, guys. And not a criticism of Heupel, not a criticism of UCF's offense, but we're talking about as extreme as it gets, right? The same ways that it will make it difficult to grade a triple option quarterback who's only ever throwing, the deep post after faking, option and counter and all this other stuff. It's hard to grade that stuff for a reason, right? Because we're hamstringing the offense in order to kind of like bottleneck it and say, we're either throwing this bomb and we're going to, and the band's going to be playing because we get this 70-yard throw, or we just throw the ball over the guy's head. Doesn't make a difference to us, because we're just going to do it again on the next play. So if it's an incompletion, what difference does it make to us? We're coming right back at it. So, Gabriel has a little bit of juice in his arm. It's not the strongest in the world, but he has enough to be able to make these vertical throws. So, I appreciate that in this game. They don't ask him to throw over the middle of the field unless the safeties are taking way off, off the hashes. So, I guess credit to a guy for knowing, when to throw the ball over the middle of the field in the offense that he's running. But yeah, I've got to see it in Gus's offense.
Yeah.
It's not, and not to say that Malzahn is going to ask him to run a pro offense, whatever that means, but I got to see it in something different. The vertical read stuff, it's not real to me. I've been burned too many times.
You know what? I kind of mentioned it before, but like Bo Nix, watching him, there was a lot of quick game stuff. There was a lot of stuff that I'm like, oh, you guys are doing that with Bo Nix? Like,
Right.
oh, really? And
Yeah.
so honestly, there's going to be stuff that Gabriel hasn't seen. So you got to hope that he figures it out. All right, number 5, Michael Penix Jr., Indiana, coming off the ACL tear, looked like one of the really good quarterbacks in college football last year before the ACL tear. Obviously, we remember what he did in the Ohio State game. Like, I'm going to tell you the honest truth with Penix Jr. He has such a weird release that I can't. I'm such a stupid quarterback person that if I see that weird of release, I'm like, you're bad. You're not a good quarterback. You're bad. Like, you can't play. Like Phillip Rivers, you're bad. You're not a Hall of Fame quarterback just because you have a bad release. And Penix is the same way. It is not a great release. But guess what? Making all the right reads. He can move around. He played behind one of the worst offensive lines in the country last season. So good on him. Like he impressed me a lot. 2 years in a row now. He came in and won the starting job over Peyton Ramsey before Peyton Ramsey transferred, and then had a good year, and then had an even better year this year. So I think this is an interesting guy to look at going forward.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of confused. It's kind of confusing with evaluating him. I do think that where he's at is probably about right. I do think that he's probably right at the midline of this group. Obviously, it's the fact that he performed well against pressure is great, but sometimes like the pressure he was under against their top competition while he was healthy was extreme. So, he did have some good receivers. Hopefully, the offensive line is a little bit better, and he's healthy. But I did like his ability to extend. His arm is a college quarterback arm.
Yeah,
that's the best way to put it. Again, not to take a dig at the guy, but it's a regular college quarterback arm. It's enough where if he can get the ball to guys who are open. He can't necessarily throw guys open. But last year he was able to extend, especially under pressure, enough to be able to have some kind of offense. So I'm interested to see if he is healthy, whether or not they can generate that again after maybe losing a little bit of talent.
All right, Matt Corral is number 6 from Ole Miss. The story with Corral, I find it very interesting because in 2019, we saw John Reese Plumlee come in, light the world on fire with his running ability, fit perfectly to a T what Rich Rodriguez, the offensive coordinator at the time, wanted to do. He's gone. Rich Rod is gone because Matt Luke is gone. And they bring in Lane Kiffin, and he's coming with Jeff Lebby. And it's like, me and Anthony Chess spent the whole offseason talking about John Reese Plumlee. But you know what? He doesn't fit the new Lane Kiffin offense. Since he went to Florida Atlantic after the Alabama days. This is a whole new offense. It's not the offense that Jalen Hurts ran as a freshman at Alabama. Matt Corral fits it so perfectly. And he was already a good passer. And he kind of just exploded this season. Now, got to say it again. What type of offense is he playing? Spread and shred. It's not as spread and shred because you are playing the SEC. And that's not entirely who Kiffin is. But it's pretty close, man. There's a lot of outside routes. Not a lot of stuff over the middle. And a lot of nice schemed up stuff because Kiffin and Lebby are in the lab and they're really good. But I'm still a big fan of Matt Corral. I thought it came out of nowhere really for me to put up the type of numbers. So I'm a fan.
Yeah, I think that, this tier, between Corral, Penix, and then who we'll get to at 7th, I think that you can make an argument for swapping any one of those 3 guys between 5, 6, and 7. I think based off the years they had last year. But yeah, to your point, Corral does play in, a very vertical offense. I do think that Kiffin maybe does a little bit more to scheme guys up. That's just, a little bit more of his nature than Lebby, who comes off of that vertical read tree. So from that perspective, he works in it. You know, he works well in that offense. I do like what he's able to do as far as decision making. You know, he's not necessarily a turnover machine. So I like that from him. You know, outside of, you know, that one really bad game where he threw a bunch of picks, he's been pretty productive. And like I said, I mean, this tier of quarterbacks, as far as coming back, any one of these guys can be the best of that group.
Yeah.
I don't think that any one of the guys that we've mentioned so far after maybe De'Aaron King has the opportunity to step up to that Sam Howell or Spencer Rattler kind of tier one level, but they'll be good enough to where, you know, their teams will be relevant in their conferences.
Okay, moving on. Number 7, Grayson McCall, Coastal Carolina. Another great story. It's something that, you know, we're going to have Coastal Carolina's offense coordinator on the podcast in the next month, I believe. And something I want to ask him that I'm very curious about is, you know, they brought in this freshman quarterback, but when you have a kid who had been in your system for a couple of years, had been the starter for a couple of years, that's a tough decision to make. I mean, you know, as coaches, we've all been there, especially at the quarterback position, where you're going to have to make that tough decision where you're going to have to sit a guy because the other guy's better. But I guess, you know, with quarterbacks, there's only one guy on the field at the time. That's tough, man. Tough when you got to look a kid in the face and you got to tell him he's not starting anymore. But they made the right decision because Grayson McCall was awesome this year. Clearly a good runner. But I think what obviously, you know, I've written about this a ton this year. What took them over the edge was his passing ability, because they still ran all their triple option stuff. They're great triple option stuff. All the counters they have, all this stuff. I love it. The trap that they run is so great. Doing all that stuff, but then still being able to be accurate on really any concept they wanted to call for him. I mean, that took their offense to another level, and him coming back and now he'll be a true sophomore, I guess. Like, that's, man, they might make some noise again in the Sun Belt this year.
Yeah, I would say so far between De'Aaron King now and talking about Grayson McCall, if I had to pick one who's probably most likely to have a year where I'm saying of that group he was the best, I would say it would be Grayson McCall, because of that offense. You know, not that he's not a good player. You know, he had a great year, but because of the offense that they run, that spread triple option stuff, the things that defenses have to do to stop that is so specific that when they do go to their pass game, they're able to specifically pinpoint and attack the things that defenses are going to be weak at, because they're committing the type of resources they have to stop the option stuff. So, especially because he is actually a viable runner. It's not just, you know, hey, you know, I'll throw the bubble screen if they crash in on the dive. There is a piece of that in their offense, but because he can actually turn the corner and keep the ball and be an explosive runner when they leave the alley open for him,
that's exactly
it forces defenses to have to bend in a way to deal with almost playing like a 3-back offense, like a true flex bone. So because he is a real running threat. So I would not be surprised if he continues to generate these explosive passing plays. I don't think you're going to see a bunch of turnovers from him, because option quarterbacks usually aren't high turnover guys. They're usually not high sack guys, because you're not really going to be blitzing them all the time. You're not going to be running all the twists and stunts and all the kind of boutique stuff that we see defenses do against the typical spread stuff, because you have to respect the threat of the option. So from that perspective, wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being one of the 3 or 4 most productive quarterbacks this upcoming season.
Yeah, they're really living in the best of both worlds because of his passing ability. All right, next on the list, number 8. And now here's the guy who, you know, we talk about that group in between who had really good seasons. With number 8, Mr. DJ from Clemson. That's all we're going to say. Mr. DJ.
I love that you don't even try.
I'll have to get it right eventually, but that's for another day. I think one of the problems with ranking him, so he'll probably end up being one of the top 5 quarterbacks. We already have him at number 8. One of the problems ranking him that high already, you know, in the top 5, is we just haven't seen. We've seen 2 games of him. It probably won't be as good as Trevor Lawrence, but he'll be different. And I know you love him. I think he's big and strong. And yeah, the accuracy has to improve a bit, but we are talking about his first 2 games ever starting. So, you know, the Boston College and the Notre Dame game, he's got everything, man. And this is the guy. He's got everything. He's got all the pro stuff that people salivate over. He could very quickly rise up these rankings.
Very much so. Like the arm is freakish, guys.
Yeah.
Like I don't think anybody can overstate what he has in terms of arm talent. He does need to understand that now that he's not at Bosco, now that he's not in high school, everything doesn't have to be a bullet. There were some times where he cost himself in terms of quality of throws, trying to fit everything in on a rope where he could have used touch. But in terms of like all the measurable stuff, you couldn't build a better quarterback in the lab. The dude's like 6'5", 245 as an 18-year-old. So, God only knows what this is going to be like when he's a junior, or even this upcoming year as a sophomore. And what we saw, even on the road against Notre Dame, for a guy to be that poised under those circumstances, they did put up 40 points, they had an opportunity to win that game. So, I think that you're going to see a guy who can make all the throws. They're going to be returning some talent, especially at receiver. If Justin Ross is what we saw of him last, he's got his number one guy. And one thing I can tell you is that in that offense, if you've got a quarterback like that and a receiver that teams can't guard man to man, you can almost bank the fact that the quarterback's going to have like a Heisman-worthy year.
Yeah,
that's what we've seen with Deshaun Watson the year they won the title. Trevor Lawrence, once he took over as a starter for Kelly Bryant his freshman year. When they have real receiver talent, it's scary, and the kid can make all the throws. So he can end up being, it could end up being, him as a number one after, or maybe number two behind Spencer Rattler as far as who has the best year.
Number 9. Miles Brennan, LSU. All right. I like Miles Brennan. I really do. I don't think
this is all you.
I don't think he's the 10th best quarterback or in the top 10 quarterback coming back. Now, a couple of things. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't have any turnover-worthy plays. He missed people. He didn't, it's there for him. I see it there for him, but sometimes and the quick game is excellent. He's excellent quick game thrower, but there's some intermediate stuff where I'm like, yo, you got to put that ball on the money, dude. Like, it's there for you. Either pull the trigger because it's open, or when you do pull the trigger, it's got to be on the money, and that didn't show up as much, I thought, in the intermediate game. He threw the ball down the field pretty well. Quick game's good. The intermediate game really gives me pause a bit going forward for LSU. What I would have liked is, last season was a lost season anyways. I would have liked to see him just get a bunch of reps. Obviously the abdomen injury never healed in time, and they had to play the two true freshman quarterbacks. Would have liked to see him just get some reps in a lost season so we could really see, because we only saw 3 games. Mississippi State has a good defense, but Vandy and Mizzou do not have good defenses. So I like certain things that I see, but I'm also not entirely convinced. And a lot of that has to do with the intermediate level. And the problem is, in LSU's offense, it is not super quarterback friendly. I mean, they're going to ask you to make those sail throws. They're going to ask you to make those dig throws. So, it's not like he's playing in these offenses that we've talked about where all you're doing is making vertical reads, vertical throws outside. He's got to get a little better in that intermediate area.
To your point, first of all, their quarterback situation was obviously unideal all year long. So if he can be healthy, from what I saw of him, the kid can make some pretty good throws. Obviously they're missing a lot of receiver talent. It was not to make excuses for LSU, but that's an unfair situation for a quarterback to step in.
Never,
they lost so much pro talent. They lose both up front as far as offensive line and at receiver and at running back. And then the number one receiver that you'd be relying on as a new quarterback opts out, for the season. So from that perspective, he didn't have a whole lot to work with. From what we saw of him, no turnover-worthy plays. So we do know that he can be smart with the football based on, what limited work we have of him. We'll see. He's kind of up in the air because the sample size is so small. I will rely on your evaluation of him because you watch LSU. So the fact that he's on this list tells me enough about what he has in terms of tools. And then, and I do think that he's the best of their quarterback room. For all the guys who played, for LSU at quarterback last year. From what I watched, he's clearly far and away, I think, the most talented and the smartest guy that they have in the quarterback room. So it's definitely his job. And if he's healthy, and if what we saw against Mississippi State specifically is maybe what we get, then he'll probably be okay.
All right, last but not least, number 10, your boy, Keaton Slovis, University of Southern California. I think Slovis had a really big chance to take a step forward. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think what happened was there was a lot of, I did this last year. I was a good quarterback in 2019. I can make all these fucking throws now. And it just, you got to be yourself sometimes. And I think almost like it felt like he wasn't trying to be himself. So I guess hopefully he gets back into into his 2019 form again in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been okay if we cut the list off at 9. It would have been fine. As far as slow, I mean, problem number one is that what teams were doing to stop USC's variation of the air raid caused him a lot of trouble. What SC really wants to do with their air raid is get like the Drake London types, get the Amon-Ra St. Brown types over the middle of the field on those over routes in the seam. The teams are dropping 8 now. So they've got so much, like, the layers of the defense now are so deep that it's not even really viable to try those passes. But you can tell that Slovis had been hardwired off of the success that he had the year prior, where, hey, this is the throw that I was making all year long last year. We were killing teams with this. And this is the throw that I want. I think that as the year went on, and he became more, at peace with checking the ball down, throwing the ball underneath, they started shortening up some of their passing concepts, only working half the field. I think that we saw a lot of promise from him, and if that's the quarterback that we get, especially like, the Utah game, UCLA, especially in the second half, and obviously some of the fourth quarter drives he had where he was at peace with taking those dink and dunk throws in order to move the ball down the field, he'll be okay. Coming off of his first year as a starter, I thought, hey, maybe this is going to be a star USC quarterback. I think that I've cooled on that now after this past season, and I'm thinking, hey, he's going to be better than serviceable. He can even be good. He can probably be really good if he plays to his peak, but I don't know if he can cross that next threshold into becoming a great quarterback.
He's got some physical limitations. He's not the fastest. He throws with great touch, but the ball doesn't pop off his hand and stuff like that. So I think for him to be this good, I think is good for him, because it's like he's got the physical limitations, but he's still producing at a high level, super accurate quarterback. Is there a guy? Okay, as we finish this list and we get out of here, do you have anyone who you're really interested in watching this season?
I mean, nobody that really absolutely stands out. Like, I'm really interested to see the guys that we have listed. Maybe JT Daniels.
That's what I was hoping you were going. Your boy. Another one of your boys.
JT Daniels. I mean, I would make the argument that if we're picking the top 10 returning, I would put him ahead of Slovis, especially based off of the way that the year ended for Daniels. Once they really kind of opened up the offense and realized that they could add some vertical stuff to their game because of the arm that he has. That's the guy I would say could be in that 9 to 10 range. But outside of that, I mean, it's all up in the air. Not everybody played the same amount of games. The quality of opponent was all over the place. The kind of work the guys are getting, it's hard to really project what next season is going to be based off of what we saw this past year. But Daniels is another one of those guys who should be in the argument, and I would say should be in the top 10. But everybody else we covered, is there anybody that you think we missed out on?
All right, I'm going to do my quick spiel on Kenny Pickett,
okay,
Pittsburgh quarterback. So I'm watching the tape. We're doing our write-ups for the College Football Preview magazine that's coming out in it feels like a long time from now, but it's some of them in July. So I started watching the film on these guys, and I look at Kenny Pickett, and he's just gonna play his whole career with them. We're never gonna see who Kenny Pickett is, because the guy's gonna play with bad offensive lines all his years as starters, and he's not gonna play with any like super stud receiver, and he's gonna play in an offense that asked him to do some real work. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, so he doesn't grade very well. Grades in the 70s. Sometimes he'll have an 80-plus game, whatever. But overall, he's 70-year-old, 70, 75 overall quarterback in PFF grade. But I look at it and I'm like, the problem is there's a lot of opportunity for negative plays. And he's not the only one. But when you're under pressure all the time, if you're under pressure, there's a bigger chance you're going to have a negative play than a positive play. When you don't have receivers who can't separate, there's a bigger chance you're going to have a negative play than a positive play. When you have to read the middle of the field over and over again, unlike the other quarterbacks, you're going to have a bigger chance of having a negatively graded play than a positively graded play. I think that's tough for him. So I just want to give my shout out to Kenny Pickett. I see you, dude. I see you. All right. That's it. That was me, PFF Seth, and PFF 7 Bracket, aka Diante Lee. And this was the PFF College Football Podcast. Thanks for listening.